The rain that had poured all night finally stopped just before dawn, leaving behind gray sidewalks and shimmering puddles beneath the streetlights. The city hadn't yet returned to its usual noisy rhythm. This brief moment of silence was one of those rare gifts New York offered from time to time. But for Adrian Locke, silence had become a foreign concept long ago. It was 6:12 a.m. Adrian sat at the desk in his third-floor apartment in Manhattan, his eyes fixed on the file lying open before him. The scattered papers on the table looked chaotic to most people, but to him, they were a map, each symbol, each scribble, each highlighted line a piece of a larger structure forming in his mind. Adrian Locke was known as one of the department's most detail-oriented detectives. People often said, "If you missed something, Locke won't. If something feels off, he senses it first. And whatever you're trying to hide, you won't hide it from him." This reputation was the result of years of extreme precision. When Adrian closed a case, he didn't just look at the final answer. He cared about the why, the how, the who, and even the emotional echo the event left in the city. The file on his desk this morning was different. There were no dramatic statements or complicated reports. Just a single line. "I heard a sound last night, then it suddenly stopped." That was taken from the statement of a 24-year-old woman living in a quiet building in Manhattan. It sounded ordinary, maybe neighbors talking loudly, maybe something falling. But what caught Adrian's eye was the final sentence of the report. It sounded like a person, almost like someone asking for help, but I couldn't understand it clearly. That one detail, that small hint of uncertainty, it was enough to spark something in Adrian's mind. In New York, people heard all sorts of noises at night. But very few described it with such hesitation, like a help call, "but I'm not sure." Most people would just say, "I heard something weird." But this had a subtle inconsistency. And Adrian Locke was drawn to inconsistencies. At 6:34 a.m., Adrian closed the file, placed his notes inside his coat pocket, and stood up. He pulled up the collar of his long black trench coat, partly to protect himself from the cold morning breeze, partly out of habit. His movements were controlled, deliberate. Adrian liked order before action. As he walked down the staircase of his building, a childhood memory surfaced. His father used to say, "Adrian, when you hear a sound, don't first think of where it came from. Think of why you heard it." That sentence had slowly become his life philosophy. Outside, the city was finally waking up. The hum of the subway, the taxi horns, distant laughter, the world was returning to its rhythm. But Adrian's mind filtered all of it out. He was focused only on the imaginary echo of that unclear plea for help. His car wasn't a classic detective-style sedan. Instead, he drove a light gray SUV. The reason was simple. In a crowded place, blending in is easier than standing out. When he turned on the radio, the morning news filled the air. Traffic updates, minor incidents here and there. Nothing about a strange sound. Another detail. Everything significant starts small. Small sounds, overlooked signs, details everyone else walks past. And those were the things Adrian chased. As he drove toward the apartment building near Broadway, the morning traffic grew heavier. Gray clouds covered the sky, giving the city a muted tone. He knew these kinds of mornings made people withdraw into themselves. Even the streets felt quieter. At every red light, his eyes scanned the windows of the buildings around him. Everywhere, life was unfolding. Every window held a different story. But Adrian's story this morning began with a whisper no one else cared to follow. When he parked in front of the building, he took a deep breath. "Everything starts with a detail," he murmured to himself. "Every story begins with the smallest sound." And with that, he stepped inside. The story had officially begun. The building stood quietly among the morning shadows, its brick walls darkened by the night's rainfall. It was the kind of apartment complex New Yorkers often walked past without a second glance, neither luxurious nor worn down, just another structure among hundreds. Adrian stepped into the lobby, immediately noticing details others would never bother with. The faint scent of cleaning solution lingered in the air. The receptionist's desk was neat, almost too neat, a sign of either strict routine or an attempt to cover up disorder. And the hallway carpet had a slight ripple, as if someone had dragged something across it recently. Most people wouldn't see that. Most people wouldn't care. But Adrian Locke wasn't most people. He approached the receptionist, a middle-aged man with weary eyes and a coffee mug that had clearly seen better days. "Morning," Adrian greeted calmly, flipping open his badge. The man straightened instantly. "Good morning, detective. Didn't expect company this early. How can I help you?" "I'm here about a report filed by a tenant last night," Adrian said. A statement about a strange sound. Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "Oh, that one." He cleared his throat. "Yeah, she was pretty shaken up. But honestly, this is New York. People hear unusual things all the time." Adrian nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the predictable response. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Seth. Seth Marlowe." "Seth, I'll need access to the surveillance footage for this floor." "Seth, I'll need access to the surveillance footage for this floor." He leaned slightly closer. "And I'm also going to need a list of recent complaints from tenants, even the ones that seemed unimportant." Seth hesitated for only a moment before sighing. "I'll get you everything I can." As Seth walked off to his back office, Adrian turned his attention to the hallway. He stood completely still, a habit he had learned over years of investigation, letting his senses adjust to the silence. The air felt heavier near the elevators. The lights flickered just a little too slowly, and somewhere in the distance, a faint dripping sound echoed, rhythmic and persistent. He followed the sound down the corridor, passing doors with numbers neatly fixed in place. 302, 304, 306. Each door had a story behind it, but Adrian wasn't searching for stories, he was searching for inconsistencies. At apartment 308, he paused. There was nothing visibly wrong with the door, but something felt out of place. An energy in the air, subtle but unmistakable. He leaned in and examined the doorknob. It had tiny scratches around the metal. Not forceful, not aggressive. More like someone with shaky hands had tried to open it repeatedly. A soft footstep sounded behind him. Adrian turned to see the tenant who had filed the report, a young woman with tired eyes and a sweater pulled tightly around her shoulders. She looked surprised and somewhat relieved to see him. "You must be Detective Locke," she said softly. "I'm Emma Collins." "Nice to meet you, Emma," he replied evenly. "I'm here to understand exactly what happened last night." Emma swallowed nervously. I hope I didn't overreact. I almost didn't make the call. But I was lying on my couch, trying to fall asleep, when I heard something from the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't normal. "Tell me what it sounded like," Adrian said, his voice steady and patient. Emma took a slow breath, searching for the right words. "It was a voice," she said finally. "But not like someone talking. More like someone trying not to be heard. I couldn't understand the words, just the tone. It felt uneasy." Adrian studied her expression. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't dramatizing. She was replaying the moment, exactly as she remembered it. "Did it stop suddenly?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. Just silence. And it came from this hallway?" Adrian motioned toward the space around them. Emma hesitated, then pointed to apartment 308. "From here, I'm almost sure." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you know who lives in 308? Emma shook her head. "I've lived here for 2 years, but I've barely seen anyone go in or out. The blinds are always closed. No visitors, no noise, ever." Just then, Seth returned, holding a folder and a small USB drive. "Here's everything you asked for, detective," he said. "And, you should also know something. The tenant in 308 hasn't answered the door in weeks. Rent is technically up to date, so we didn't push it." Adrian exchanged a glance with Emma. "Has anyone checked inside?" he asked. Seth shook his head. Adrian turned back to the door of 308. His instinct, the one he had spent years sharpening, whispered to him. Something isn't right. He placed his hand gently on the door. Not pushing, not knocking, just feeling the cold metal. Behind this door, there was a story waiting to be uncovered. And Adrian Locke was about to open the first page. New York, a city that never slows, never softens, and never apologizes. For most people, it's a maze of noise and movement. But for me, it is a library of clues. Every corner carrying a whisper, every shadow storing a story waiting to be understood. My name is Adrian Locke. I work as a consultant investigator for the NYPD. A position I didn't choose, but somehow grew into. Most detectives look for patterns. I look for disruptions, the things that don't fit, the tiny details that shouldn't be there, the quiet parts of the city that normal people walk past without ever noticing. On a cold November morning, at exactly 6:14 a.m., my day began with a message, one single line. We need your eyes on this. We need your eyes on this. No context, no attachment, just a feeling that something was very wrong. When I arrived at the scene, the first thing I noticed wasn't the people, or the tape, or the scattered belongings. It was the silence, a kind of silence that only appears right after something disruptive has happened. A silence heavy enough to be a clue on its own. The location: a narrow alley between two old brick buildings in Lower Manhattan. A place where the past still clings to the walls, and where secrets settle like dust. Officers stood around, waiting, not because they didn't know what to do, but because they wanted someone who could read the scene the way a historian reads ruins. I took a slow breath and began with the basics: the ground, the walls, the smell in the air, the temperature, and the positioning of every object, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Most people think an investigation starts with the obvious. For me, it always starts with one question: what shouldn't be here? And there it was, a small fragment of paper, tucked beneath a broken crate, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. A corner of a page, torn at an angle too precise to be accidental. On it, a faint, smudged marking. Not a letter, not a number, more like a symbol, something that belonged to a message, or a habit, or a person who wanted to be understood, or wanted to be misunderstood. As I lifted the piece of paper with tweezers, the morning light caught it, revealing the outline of a shape I recognized, one I had seen in a previous case, long buried and officially resolved, though the ending never sat right with me. A cold realization settled in. This wasn't a random discovery. This was a signal. Someone was inviting me back into a story that I thought had ended years ago. Someone who knew my methods, knew my habits, and knew that I would find this detail, even if no one else could. I turned to the officers and gave a simple instruction: seal the area. Nothing moves until I'm done. They nodded. They were used to this. To them, my process is slow. To me, it is essential. While others saw an empty alley, I saw a map, a path of intentions, misdirections, and decisions frozen in time. And somewhere among these bricks and footsteps was the beginning of a new thread. A thread connected to someone who had returned after years of silence. A quiet case, a missing detail, a symbol from the past. Whatever this was, I knew one thing: New York had just whispered something to me. And I was going to follow that whisper until it turned into a truth. Some cases don't begin with a confession, they begin with a question. In my world, the smallest question can open the door to the largest truth. After discovering that small, torn piece of paper in the alley, I returned to my apartment, a narrow, quiet space above a bookstore, filled with files, maps, and memories that never learned how to rest. I placed the fragment on my desk under a lamp, letting the warm light reveal every fiber of the paper. The symbol on it, a slightly curved shape intersected by a short horizontal line, looked almost innocent. Almost, but nothing is ever simple in New York. Years ago, this same mark appeared in a case involving a series of misleading clues. Clues left not to harm anyone directly, but to create confusion so skillfully that the real story hid beneath layers of distraction. That case was closed, at least, officially. Unofficially, I always felt like it ended too early, too neatly, as if someone had decided the truth didn't need to be fully uncovered. This symbol was their signature. A quiet one, but intentional. And now, it was back. I logged the detail into my personal archive, a digital collection of unresolved threads and unanswered whispers. Each entry had a label. This one: the silent mark, reemergence. But unanswered clues rarely travel alone. They bring company. At exactly 9:42 a.m., I received a call. Unknown number. No voicemail, just a brief vibration, as if someone wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I stared at the phone for a long second, not out of fear, but because timing is a language, and whoever made that call was fluent in it. I headed back to the alley. This time, I wasn't looking for objects. I was looking for behavior. People in New York walk fast, think fast, live fast, but the alley was different today. The air felt heavier, more focused, somehow. I measured the distance between the paper fragment's resting spot and the entrance of the alley. 22 steps, a deliberate placement, not dropped, not blown by the wind. Left for me. I crouched down, tracing a faint set of marks on the ground, shallow, hesitant, and spaced unevenly. Footsteps, but not someone running, someone waiting, watching. Across from them, another set. Heavier, more grounded. These two people were facing each other. A silent interaction, frozen on the pavement. No signs of conflict, no sign of distress, just a meeting. One person left a fragment. The other left nothing. I glanced upward. Fire escapes, windows, 3 security cameras, older models, the kind that record poorly during early morning light. But systems like these forget one thing. While cameras can miss the truth, the city itself never does. Took out my notebook and wrote one line, 2 people, 1 message, 1 witness, me. As I closed the notebook, a soft breeze moved through the alley, lifting a few small pieces of debris. Among them, a second fragment, this one almost invisible, caught near the base of a trash bin. A piece of string, thin, dark red, tied with a single, precise knot. My pulse steadied. This knot was not common. It was the kind used by a specific group during the previous case, a technique meant to signal direction, not danger. Someone wasn't warning me, someone was guiding me. Stood up slowly. Whoever left these clues knew how I thought, how I searched, how I followed a trail. This wasn't an opponent, this was someone who wanted to be found. But the question that mattered most was not who left the clues. It was, why now? The answer was somewhere in the city, hidden behind a symbol, a knot, and a silence that wasn't empty, but full of intention. And I was determined to listen to every part of it. Every city has its secrets. But New York stores its secrets above eye level, on rooftops, fire escapes, and ledges most people never look up to see. After finding the second clue, a thin red string tied with a precise knot, I knew the trail was no longer confined to the ground. Whoever left it wanted me to look up, to think vertically, to follow the city upward instead of forward. The rooftops of Manhattan are like an invisible second world, a place where footsteps echo differently, and where stories leave marks even the wind can't erase. I climbed the fire escape ladder, each step cold under my hands, the metal worn smooth from decades of use. The morning sun had just begun to paint the edges of the buildings, casting long shadows that felt like stretched moments of time. At the top, the rooftop opened into a flat expanse of concrete, tagged with faded graffiti, scattered with old vents and broken antennas. A quiet space, too quiet. But quiet is good. Quiet means the details can speak. I scanned the surface methodically. No fresh footprints, no obvious signs of struggle or movement. But there was something else. Something subtle. Near the far edge of the rooftop, a row of small, evenly spaced pebbles formed a line. Not natural, not accidental. A pattern. Someone arranged them, not to leave a message for everyone, but for someone who notices symmetry where others see randomness. I crouched down and examined the placement. 7 pebbles, 3 to the left, 3 to the right, 1 in the center. The same symbolic structure that appeared in the earlier case. A symbol for balance, or more accurately, imbalance restored. Why here? Why now? The wind shifted, and for a moment, I heard a faint creak, the soft metallic sound of a loose sign swaying below. But beneath it, a second sound. A light tapping, not mechanical, not environmental, intentional. I followed the sound to the edge, peering down into the alley from where I had climbed. The rhythm of the tapping became clearer. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a pause, 1 tap. A sequence, a countdown. I leaned over slightly, scanning the opposite building. There, on a fire escape directly across from me, a small metal hook swayed gently against the railing, striking it with the wind. But the pattern of movement didn't match the pattern of sound. The wind was steady, the tapping was not. Someone had adjusted it earlier. Someone had positioned it to communicate a timed message, or to signal the direction of the next step. I crossed the rooftop to gain a better angle, and as I stepped between 2 old ventilation pipes, my foot nudged something soft. Cloth, a small piece of gray fabric, torn deliberately, caught between the metal and the concrete. Not weather-beaten, not aged, recently placed. Lifted it carefully. No logo, no distinguishable features, just a specific type of stitch, a double-edge pattern used in custom tailoring. A detail most people wouldn't notice. A detail crafted by someone who paid attention to every thread. I placed it into an evidence pouch and checked the area for more. And then I saw it. A faint chalk mark on the ground. Circular, incomplete, as if someone started drawing it but stopped halfway, or was interrupted. The symbol matched the torn paper from the alley. Same curve, same intention. This rooftop wasn't just a vantage point. It was part of the message. As I stood there, a distant siren echoed through the blocks below, but my focus remained locked on that half-drawn shape. Someone was leading me, not into danger, but into clarity. Piece by piece, detail by detail, they were unveiling a story that had been buried under years of silence. And then, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Again, this time, a text message. "You're looking in the right direction, Adrian." No signature, no context, just confirmation. This wasn't random, this wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching my movements closely enough to know exactly where I stood. At the exact moment the message was sent, a chill ran through me, not from fear, but from recognition. This person wasn't an adversary. Not yet. They were someone who understood my methods, my attention to detail, and my need for answers. Someone who wanted to rewrite the ending of a long-forgotten case. I pocketed the phone, took one last long look across the rooftops, and wrote a new line in my notebook. The person leaving these clues is not hiding from me. They are guiding me, and as the sun climbed higher over the skyline, one thing became unmistakably clear. The past hadn't returned on its own. Someone brought it back, and they wanted me to follow it. All the way to the truth. Clues may hide in alleys and rooftops, but answers prefer silence. And in New York, silence is a rare luxury. After receiving the message, "You're looking in the right direction, Adrian," I knew two things. First, this person was not only following my investigation, they were predicting it. Second, I couldn't continue relying only on the physical trail. I needed context. I needed to revisit the past. There's a place in Manhattan the public rarely talks about, a place where old cases go to sleep, not from closure, but from dust and neglect. The NYPD Historical Archive Room, in the basement level of an old administrative building. It smells like forgotten paper and aging metal, and the lights hum with a faint flicker, as if they, too, hold memories. I entered using my consultant badge, signed the logbook, and walked down the long hall lined with file cabinets tall enough to feel like walls of a labyrinth. The case I was looking for had a number burned into my memory, Case 41B. A case that involved a pattern of symbols, misleading clues, and a person who always seemed to be one step ahead, like a shadow that moved with intention. It was officially archived 8 years ago, but something about it never rested. When I reached the back section, I noticed the filing cabinet for the 40 series cases had been recently accessed. The dust layer was disturbed. Barely, but enough. Someone had been here. I opened the drawer. Case 41B's folder was still there, but the top edge was slightly bent, a sign that it had been pulled out and reinserted without the usual precision the archivists maintained. I removed the folder and walked to a desk under a dim lamp. Inside were photographs, notes, diagrams, and transcripts from interviews. But as I turned the pages, something felt off. A page was missing. Page 7. The page containing the psychological profile of the person of interest from that old case. A profile I remembered vividly because it mentioned something rare, an unusual cognitive trait. An individual with a need to be heard, but only through controlled silence. Someone who communicates not through volume, but through exact, subtle placement of details. Someone who would leave a fragment of paper, tie a precise knot, and draw an unfinished symbol on a rooftop. As I stared at the empty gap where the page should have been, I felt something close to understanding, not a conclusion, but the shape of one. Then, suddenly, a soft noise. Footsteps, slow, measured, just outside the archive room. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no one was scheduled to enter this section today. The footsteps paused near the entrance, as if the person were listening to confirm if someone else was inside. I gently closed the folder and dimmed the desk lamp, allowing the room to sink into a muted half-darkness. I moved silently between the rows of cabinets, positioning myself where I could observe without being seen. The door opened. A faint rectangle of light from the hallway spilled into the room, revealing the silhouette of a person, tall, wearing a long coat. Head tilted slightly as if tracking the temperature of the air. They stepped inside, their hand gliding along the row of cabinets with a familiarity that made one thing certain. This wasn't their first visit. They walked directly to the same drawer I had opened minutes earlier. The 40 series, and without hesitation, they reached for the exact cabinet containing case 41B. They paused, their hand hovered over the drawer, then withdrew slowly. They sensed something. I watched their posture shift, a subtle tightening of the shoulders, a small adjustment in stance. Not fear, not urgency, awareness. They turned their head slightly, listening. For me, I held my breath, waiting as the silence thickened. After a long moment, the figure stepped back, pulled a small object from their coat, and placed it gently on top of the cabinet. Then they left, closing the door behind them with a soft click. When I finally emerged from my hiding place, my focus went to the object they left behind. A folded note. Not sealed, not hidden, an offering. I opened it, the paper whispering faintly as it unfolded. Inside were 3 words, written in the same neat, measured handwriting from the original case. You remember correctly. No signature, no explanation, just confirmation that the person behind the symbols, the clues, and the rooftop message was the same person from case 41B. Someone who had resurfaced after 8 silent years. Someone who understood my memory better than most people understand the present. I placed the note into my coat pocket and wrote in my notebook, "The past isn't returning." It was waiting, and as I left the archives, I knew one thing for certain. Whoever this person is, they're not just communicating with me. They're guiding me toward something I'm only beginning to understand. Patterns don't appear by chance. They emerge because someone shapes them, piece by piece, detail by detail, until the truth is no longer hidden, just overlooked. Leaving the archives, the streets of Manhattan felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just sharper, as if the city itself had become aware that something long dormant was waking up. I walked toward the subway entrance on 5th Avenue, the cold air brushing against my coat, carrying with it the distant scent of roasted peanuts and street-side coffee. Normal smells, normal sounds, but normalcy means nothing when someone is rewriting the meaning behind familiar things. When I reached the platform, I waited near the back, a habit born from years of observing people, not because I distrust them, but because crowd behavior reveals truths individual conversations never do. The train arrived with a gust of warm air. I stepped in, found a quiet corner, and finally unfolded the note left in the archive room again. You remember correctly, a simple message. Too simple for a person whose methods were layered, deliberate, almost architectural. The message wasn't confirming my memory. It was confirming their presence. They knew what I remembered. And more importantly, they knew when I'd come looking for it. This wasn't someone resurfacing randomly. This was someone who had been waiting for me to reach the exact point where the past and present intersect. Someone who studied me the same way I studied crime scenes. When I stepped off the train and walked up the exit stairs into the night air, the realization settled in. I wasn't following their clues. I was walking a path they built for me. The next step was to locate something, anything, that tied the rooftop clues to the missing page from case 41B. I headed to my apartment, climbed the narrow stairwell, and unlocked my door. Inside, the room was quiet, still, undisturbed, at least, at first glance. But my eyes are trained to see what most people don't. I noticed it immediately. A book on my desk, one I hadn't touched in months, was slightly shifted. Only a few millimeters, barely perceptible. But enough. I approached slowly. The book was an old journal of mine, containing sketches, theories, and an unfinished map of connections from past unresolved cases. Someone had opened it, read it, closed it, and then placed something inside. A thin envelope. No stamp, no seal, just my name, Adrian, written with the same measured hand.